So today I'm joined by Dr. Turabelidze, who is our state epidemiologist, and we're going to talk all things COVID-19 vaccine. So to get started, can we talk a little bit about the history of vaccines and how important they are in public health?
Sure, Megan, thanks for inviting for the interview. Before I start talking, I also want to mention that I'm a Missouri State Epidemiologist as well. I'm a board-certified pediatrician and I'm a practicing doctor. So when I'm talking about vaccines, vaccine safety, vaccine experiences, I speak from experience, not from books or journals. And besides, I have a background in science and scientific publications, and when I speak about scientific reports, I also have experience about those. Now regarding your question, development of vaccines and vaccinations were tremendous success of public health in the 20th century and now in the 21st century. Because of such a tremendous success, people do not remember hundreds of thousands of babies and older people dying from different diseases. People do not remember how babies were dying in the United States, tens of thousands of them, just from coughing themselves to death because the bacteria was choking them. People do not remember people dying from measles and those who survived having permanent brain damage. People don't realize that even today, like last year, according to WHO, up to 200,000 young babies died worldwide from measles. And a lot of this misery was eliminated because of the vaccines. And the younger generation do not recall this, and that's why they think that things were always the way they are today. But things were very different and much worse in the beginning of 20th century, even in the middle of 20th century. For example, give you one example, just like in Japan, 1970s, there was a concern that pertussis vaccine could be causing problems, and people started vaccinating. Within 2 years, cases of pertussis increased in Japan 40 times, 40 times within 2 years. And then people, when babies started dying, people went back to vaccinating again, and all this went away. So here is a very good illustration how quickly things may turn around when you drop vaccination and how quickly they can improve when you start vaccinating again.
So as we get into the COVID-19 vaccine, what are the primary ingredients used in these two front runners? Let's start with those two, so Pfizer and Moderna.
Yeah, thanks for question. You proposing question which is correctly proposed, because when people these days I hear talking about the COVID vaccine have this problem, that problem, they have this ingredient, then the next question is which one are you talking about? There are about 200 vaccines proposed for COVID. And they have different ways how these vaccines are made, so they have different ingredients. So thanks for asking specifically about mRNA vaccines. Yes. If we need to, I can speak more in depth about what kind of vaccines are there, why they are different. We can talk about that. But first let me answer that question. mRNA vaccines. If I just briefly answer directly your question, when it comes to Pfizer vaccine, which is the only one that has emergency use authorization as of today, and the Moderna vaccine is probably next in line, but the one that is already being injected in people's arms is the Pfizer vaccine. An exact list of ingredients is available on the internet for anyone to see, and if we look at it, we will see what is in there. What is in there is the synthetic mRNA, which is ribonucleic acid made in laboratory. It's synthetic, it's not taken from the virus. Then there are lipids, 4 different lipids. And one of them is actually cholesterol that we all have in the body. some of us more than we would like. So one of them is cholesterol. And why do we need lipids? We need lipids to give a structure to that envelope. Because the RNA, ribonucleic acid, is very fragile and could be quickly destroyed by our bodies when it's introduced in your body, the scientists needed to envelope it in some kind of a protection. And they came up with these lipid particles. They call nanoparticles because they're tiny, tiny particles, no larger than the virus itself. And they envelope mRNA to protect it from the destruction. So, and one of those lipids is positively charged. And the reason is because the RNA itself is negatively charged. So obviously positive, negative attract to each other and they stick together. And the other two lipids are just giving structure to this protective envelope. Just like a house needs a frame, otherwise it will collapse, the same with this one. You need a structure. The one thing I should mention that it is suspected that that positively charged lipid particle could be the one could theoretically cause a allergic reaction, for example, that people are concerned with. But the analysis shows that that's if there is anything causing, that could be the one that causing allergic reaction. The other parts are salts. One, just a simple table salt, and then some other salts. So why do we need salts? We need salts there because in our body we have a certain acidity, what's called pH, and we need to match the acidity of the vaccine we're injecting to people to acidity of the blood and system inside the human body. So the matching them makes it more effective. So that's why we need a salt. And the last one is again, home ingredient, sugar, just a regular table sugar. And sugar is there as what we call stabilizer. It helps that frozen lipid particles, as we know Pfizer is frozen vaccine, they don't stick to each other and stay apart. So that's why we have a sugar in it. So here is all ingredients, and what you probably noticed, I did not mention any preservatives like thimerosal. It's not there simply. I did not mention any adjuvants like aluminum because it's not there. I told you exactly what is in it, and there is also, as you notice, I did not mention any protein because there is no protein in Pfizer vaccine.
All right. And so I know you briefly touched on allergic reactions, and so that's been a concern recently as there have been some reactions in especially the UK. So I don't know if you want to go into a little more detail about when that's most likely to happen and so why the majority of the population doesn't need to have that concern.
Allergic reaction is always a concern with anything we inject into our body. So the mRNA vaccine is not any different in that respect. What happened in England, those two allergic reactions, what we call anaphylactoid reactions, that look like anaphylactic reaction, but they have a different mechanism, but they look the same. They happened in those people who already actually had a history of allergic reaction to vaccines. And so they had already predisposition to this. And therefore, to be extremely cautious, our recommendation, including DHSS recommendation, is not to vaccinate people who have history of allergy to any ingredient that I just listed on the list of the ingredients. That would be what we call absolute contraindication, when you should not take the vaccine. Or if somebody takes the vaccine, the first dose develops bad allergic reaction, they should not obviously go for the second dose of this vaccine. Again, once we start injecting thousands and tens and hundreds of thousands of people, we will probably gain more experience what kind of allergic reactions are happening, what is the entire range of those allergic reactions. But this is in a way expected and can be prevented with immediate medical treatment.
How do we know that the vaccine is safe?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's probably a pretty long answer if I can start answering it. So let's say where to start. Okay, why people ask this question? I think it's a fair question. People think, okay, wait a minute. You're telling me that it takes you 6 months to develop flu vaccine, even though we're developing it for many, many years, and this one can be developed in a shorter time. So are you guys cutting corners there? I think that's what everybody thinks, and they're right. You have to ask this kind of question. What happened? And the answer is actually, even for myself and many physicians and scientists, it is a miracle what happened with this one. Why? Because there was so many different confluence of many different factors and facts that came together to give us this vaccine in such a short time. First of all, this is not the vaccine that we are used to. This is messenger RNA vaccine. So unlike other vaccines, this vaccine has no dead virus, no killed virus, no weakened virus, no parts of the virus, nothing. It is completely synthetic. RNA can be synthesized quickly in the lab. Once the scientists decoded the spike protein of the virus, and the spike protein is like a protrusion on top of the SARS coronavirus, which kind of rams its way inside the cell. That's why the virus needs the spike protein. So once they decoded what this protein formula was, which is easy to do these days, then you can make a ribonucleic acid that encodes that formula. You know how many days it took Moderna to do that?
How long?
2 days. In 2 days, they encoded RNA with that protein sequence. And the entire vaccine was produced in 2 months because you can synthesize it in the lab. You don't need eggs, you don't need human tissues, you don't need animal tissues, you don't need anything to produce those vaccines. So that's why the process is so much quicker. The other thing, in a way, which was helpful is that COVID virus turned out to be not mutating as fast as, for example, flu. And the range of these viruses is not as diverse as, for example, HIV vaccine. So that's why, even though we've been trying for many years to develop HIV vaccine, even including mRNA technology, it hasn't happened so far because it is very diverse virus. So with COVID, we were relatively lucky that it's not changing that quickly, and that was also helpful in the development of vaccine. The other thing is that because of original SARS back in 2003, and then MERS that followed several years later, which is still happening around the world, scientists have been working on coronavirus vaccines already. So this is not something was created from the scratch. The science was already there. So we just needed to perfect it. And besides, the technology itself goes back to 90s, the idea of mRNA vaccine. But it was difficult to accomplish technologically for different reasons, and one of them being funding. You have to commit hundreds of millions of dollars, if not more, if you are a pharmaceutical company, to develop vaccine. And that's difficult to do. But in this case, US government actually paid upfront, I think its numbers are probably close to $2 billion to vaccine manufacturers, so they can make a vaccine, don't think about funding, just think about making a vaccine. And that was very helpful. So you have funding, you have cooperation of federal government. FDA created a very clear, very strict and very clear criteria what they expect from clinical trials, so that pharmaceutical companies can develop vaccine and don't have a surprise, oh, we didn't do that, so we're going to reject your vaccine. FDA was very clear. So you have funding, you have US government behind you, you have all scientists in the world. There was extreme collaboration between everyone. And plus you have FDA working closely to speed up the process. And that's what happens. So that's why there was no cutting corners. It was confluence of all these factors together that made it possible to happen. And this is just the beginning. The mRNA vaccines will be used for other diseases. And I've seen even an idea that we can actually encode several different diseases in one mRNA vaccine, and with one shot vaccinate you against several diseases, not just one. So we're just in the beginning of the revolution in how we're going to administer vaccines in the future.
So we've already talked a little bit about the allergic side of side effects. What are some other possible side effects?
Yes, this is an important question because the vaccine was developed and clinical trials were people involved over summer, and we are now only in the beginning of winter. Simply there was not enough time to see all the possible side effects. So side effects are the short-term side effects and long-term side effects. When it comes to the short-term side effects, we have a pretty much good idea what those are. And remember that we are talking here about tens of thousands of people who already been vaccinated in clinical trials. For example, Pfizer has 44,000 people. Moderna has at least 35,000. AstraZeneca, I think they're looking at 60,000 people. So we're talking about tens of thousands of people here. And based on that, side effects are happening, especially the minor, what we call local side effects, like a pain, an injection site, swelling, headache, muscle aches, joint aches, weakness. But they last about 2-3 days. Some people have fever, and most of them self-resolve within 2-3 days. Unfortunately, they are kind of more common than you would expect from compared to other shots, like flu, for example. The reason they're more common is probably because that's the way your immune system is reacting, and immune system needs to recognize this vaccine and react to it to develop antibodies. So in a way, it is telling you if you have those issues with pain or fever, that your probably immune system is working. Also on a good side is that less than 1 in 200 people developed what we call life-threatening side effects. But those were not more common than in the group of people where they received the placebo. As you know, in clinical trial, we have an actual vaccine and placebo, and nobody knows who gets what, other than the scientists. And so it wasn't more common than placebo, so it's difficult to connect. Was it really from vaccine or something else? Scientists were still able to connect probably one case of shoulder injury, one case of lymph node swelling that was probably from the vaccine. And there are several, I believe like 4 cases of what we call Bell's palsy, which is a temporary face paralysis, which was observed not much more frequently than you would expect when you have so many thousands of people in clinical trial, but it's still concerning, and it's being further investigated. So that's when we talk about short-term side effects. The long-term side effects, you need observation after vaccination for at least 2 years and longer to see what the range of long-term effects are going to happen. And because vaccine was only recently introduced in clinical trials, we don't have luxury of time. And imagine if we wait for 2 years to watch for all long-term effects, millions more of people will die. And pandemic could be over by then without any vaccine anyway. So that's why we do not have luxury of waiting. So I'm not gonna say that everything is fine, there will be no long-term risks. First of all, nobody recorded anything regarding long-term risk, even though theoretical risks, which are expressed by the same scientists who developed vaccine, is that because we are interacting with the immune system, is it possible that somebody will develop autoimmune disease? Is that possible that same lipid nanoparticles can be somehow toxic to the body? But this is all theoretical. Nobody's seen it. So it is not risk-free. And speaking of risk, I think everyone needs to put risk in perspective. You know, we have a risk of getting in the car and driving, going to work, or being hit and being in a car accident and dying, but we still drive to work. We have a risk of going to a restaurant or supermarket and buying food contaminated with E. coli or salmonella, but we still eat. So it is not possible to live real life and not be subject to some kind of risks. And it is a matter of weighing your risk. So here you are answering question, am I risking more my health by not vaccinating, or am I risking my health by vaccinating? That's what you have to look at, because there is no zero risk in anything.
Mm-hmm. And so like for me, I will be going to my primary care physician to have a conversation saying, okay, you know my health, is this a good option? And so I think that's something that everyone should consider. Would you agree?
That is correct. You have to weigh your risks. You have to weigh, remember the vaccine is not only for yourself, it is also to protect others around you. You may have family members who are a lot more susceptible to the damage from this virus than you are. And you may be perfectly cautious and of course you don't want to be a source of infection for anybody else. But with this virus, we know that you can still transmit infection unknowingly, and that's why you have to be always mindful that vaccine will protect not only you but also protect others.
Mm-hmm. Some questions that we also get from the public on our social media, and I'm sure that everyone else has and asks. So, can you get COVID-19 from the vaccine?
Yeah, that's probably also a normal question, because people used to knowledge that the vaccine has some part of the virus or bacteria or whatever, like as we know, like flu vaccine, for example. And with this one, at least the ones that are authorized right now, mRNA vaccines, they have no way of infecting someone, because, as I described, there is only active ingredient is synthetic ribonucleic acid. There is no part of virus there. There is no dead virus. There is no weakened virus. There is not even a part of the virus in this vaccine. So mRNA vaccine cannot possibly infect you. And since I promise you I'll talk more about what kind of vaccines are there, let me use this opportunity right now and say, so all these vaccines, as I mentioned, nearly 200 vaccines across the world are being developed for COVID. And so far, the only winner that is authorized is the Pfizer vaccine. Next one is Moderna vaccine. And there are probably another at least 5 or so that could be finishing up their phase 3 clinical trials. And then there is probably another 50 being in the development. And actually there are vaccines that are not even injectables. There are vaccines under development that could be intranasal, there are vaccines that could be inhaled, and vaccines that even could be swallowed. And these are all COVID vaccines. So there's a wide range of vaccines and how they're made and what is in those vaccines. So roughly, we spoke about mRNA vaccines already. This is one type of vaccines. Then the another type of vaccine is the vector vaccines. For example, like the AstraZeneca vaccine, or the Russian vaccine, or the vaccine they're making in India, for example. So those vector vaccines do use a virus, but it's not the COVID virus. They use adenovirus, which is totally harmless because it cannot replicate in your body. Why they need that? Why they need that? Because they need this virus to deliver the active ingredient in the vaccine inside your body. So, for example, as I mentioned, mRNA vaccine, you use a lipid particles to protect the RNA. In these vaccines, they use actual different virus, attach that genetic information to it, and deliver it inside the body, and then this virus, of course, is eliminated. So these are vector vaccines. And then there are so-called subunit vaccines, which you take part of the virus. As I mentioned, the COVID vaccine has a protein called spike protein, which is pretty large protein molecule. So you don't even need to take the entire molecule. If you take part of it, that part is enough to make immune system start making antibodies against it. So you can, so those subunit vaccines, like for example, Novavax is the subunit vaccine, and they make body to respond to develop antibodies against this portion of the protein, spike protein of the COVID vaccine. So in a nutshell, here is the diversity of these vaccines. And even though it is possible that some company will try to use weakened or killed COVID vaccine, there is nothing right now in approval or not approval, sorry, authorization. There is no vaccine that is approved, they're authorized. So there's no vaccine authorized or close to authorization or in phase 3 trials that have anything in there that can infect you. That's the bottom line.
Should I continue to wear a mask, social distance, maintain good hygiene, and avoid large gatherings after I've gotten the vaccine?
Yeah, I know this is a frustrating part, and believe it's frustrating for everyone, including myself. The reason why we still recommend masking and social distancing, the reason is that, first of all, once you're vaccinated, full protection takes about 4 weeks, because you need 3 weeks between 2 shots and at least a week, maybe more, after the second shot. So 3 weeks plus 1 week, 4 weeks, 4 weeks plus. That's how much time you need to have a full protection from vaccine. So if you've been infected right before you got the shot, the vaccine, or any time within the 4 weeks, is that possible? Of course it's possible. There is a lot of virus around. So then you can still be infected. So now what that means? That means that you can, let me back up. When we say vaccine has 95% efficacy, we have to understand what the words exactly say. You have to be always careful reading what you are seeing rather than listening to other people interpreting for you, people who are not experts in this field. 95% efficacy means that if I got the vaccine and you didn't get the vaccine, my risk of being infected is 95% less than yours. That's what it means. It does not mean that 100 people vaccinated, 95% of them, 95 of them will not develop infection. No, it means how much it cuts the risk. So that's the first thing. Again, the 95% efficacy is against developing symptomatic disease. So it's not known if you develop COVID without symptoms, can vaccine protect you against it? And as we know, you can develop illness without symptoms and still transmit infection. So two questions that are still not answered with these vaccines, and everybody anxiously wants to know, is can it protect against asymptomatic infections? And so far, preliminary data is that Moderna and Pfizer vaccine maybe, especially Moderna, maybe about 60% efficacious against asymptomatic infection. But again, this is preliminary, this is not final, so it could be more, could be less. We will see. And the other unanswered question is, if I'm vaccinated, am I less likely to transmit infection to others? Mm-hmm. And that's also a question that is still unanswered. So all these questions could be answered in post-marketing phase 4, what we call phase 4 trials, which are already set up. And CDC is one of them, one of the agencies conducting those studies. And those studies will answer not also long-term side effects question, as well as answer a question regarding are vaccinated people less likely to transmit or not. So I have a little bit of a long convoluted answer to your simple question, but the bottom line is that because we don't know all those things, it is frustrating, but we still have to wear a mask, at least in the near future. But hopefully when we have lots of people vaccinated and we can reasonably expect the herd immunity developing in our communities, I'm sure the recommendations will be changed.
Is it safe for children to be vaccinated, especially with Pfizer or Moderna?
Current recommendations are for persons for Pfizer. You need to be at least 16 years old and older to get vaccinated. The reason is not because it's harmful to children. The reason is that unfortunately in those trials, clinical trials, children were not involved. So we cannot simply say that if adults did okay, let's jump in and go ahead and vaccinate kids. So how to remedy this? Pfizer already expanding down to 12 years of age, so they're adding in clinical trials adolescents 12 years and older. And then usually you do this and then you move down a little bit and to middle school age, and then you move. And usually the last age group in vaccines is always the babies because they are most precious and most vulnerable. And so unfortunately with children, we go much slower because this is our special population. And so far, the recommendation is not to vaccinate kids is not because it's harmful, but because we don't have enough data, and we don't want to jump into something that we do not have a good knowledge of.
So is it safe for pregnant women to be vaccinated?
With pregnant women, it was actually almost the same situation. There were not enough pregnant women involved in the study, and that's the reason that the recommendation exists for pregnant to get vaccinated, but it is with precautions. Mm-hmm. Why do we need to vaccinate? Unfortunately, pregnant women who infected with COVID already accumulating data shows that they have more severe illness and more complications. So you do want to vaccinate pregnant women. So current recommendation is to vaccinate pregnant with a consideration of individuals' risk. Do you live in a community with lots of infections? Do you have underlying health condition that can make your COVID infection even much worse? And all these factors you have to consider with your individual doctor, with your OBGYN physician, and make decision together. But theoretically and practically, they can be vaccinated.
If I get vaccinated, how long will immunity last?
Yeah, you have a habit asking questions that I don't have 100% answer. Yeah, just like I said with long-term side effects, the same thing here, because the clinical trials only started in summer, we don't have a long follow-up period to say how long immunity lasts. So far, there is a small portion of clinical trial participants, I believe in Pfizer study, that they looked at the antibody titers. And they found that 4 months out, they still have a good antibody titers. And there is also some encouraging news that the T-cell immunity also could be lasting longer in persons vaccinated, because our immunity, not only antibodies which are produced by B cells, but there are also so-called cellular immunity or T cells. Mm-hmm. And T cells also play a role in our protection. The measuring T cell immunity is one of the many scientific research that is going on right now, seeing to measure how well the T cell immunity is working and how long it can last.
If I've recovered from COVID-19, do I still need to get the vaccine?
If you are recovered from the illness, there is no contraindication why you should not be vaccinated. As theoretically, as soon as you are done with your symptoms, you are released from isolation and you feel much better, you can be vaccinated. But we have a data accumulating also that the protection from natural illness lasts for several months, depending on the study you look at. It could be 3 months, 4 months, 6 months. But at this time, we know for sure for 90 days or 3 months following your illness, chance of being reinfected are very small. Mm-hmm. So therefore, there is no really reason to rush within those 90 days to get vaccinated. Mm-hmm. So if you had illness, you have all these 90 days to think about it. But you can be vaccinated even if you had the illness.
Why are there 2 doses?
This is not the only COVID vaccine that we use 2 doses. There are many other, especially childhood vaccines. All mothers know that, how many times you have to go to pediatrician to give the same shot over and over. The reason is that when we give the first shot, we introduce something in your body, and the immune system is learning how to deal with it and starts reacting to it. And when we give the second shot, we will stimulate immune system to the full extent so that it can have a much better protection that is not only temporary, but lasts as long as possible. So that's why the second shot is consolidating kind of a immune response that we already have.
We've answered this a little bit, not here, but just in general, of who qualifies first for the vaccine?
The vaccine, even though millions of doses are developed, there's still a lot more people who need the vaccine than what we have available. Through the end of this year, the Pfizer was promised the U.S. government about 20 million doses. And in the next year, Pfizer production could be more than 1 billion doses. But Pfizer, they have obligation for many other countries mm-hmm. besides the United States. Moderna is also, I think they can do like 10 million doses through the end of 2020. And then they're looking at somewhere between 500 million to 1 billion doses next year. So right now, we have to give it to people who are in most need for it. And obviously our most vulnerable people who have the highest death rate are our senior citizens in nursing homes. So senior citizens in nursing homes are priority, as well as the healthcare workers. Obviously, if we have infected healthcare workers, they cannot provide care for other people. So it is essential to have healthcare workers vaccinated, and it's been shown over and over in many studies that the risk for healthcare workers of getting infected and dying is multiple times higher than the average person risk.
Do we have an approximate guess of when the vaccine will be available to the general public?
As I just mentioned, because we don't have a solid numbers by month, how many vaccines Pfizer can commit in the United States or Moderna can produce next year. Also, we don't know, will, for example, next vaccines in line will be available or not, like AstraZeneca vaccine, will it be available or not? It's difficult to predict, but I'm hopeful that in the spring, by the springtime, we have enough vaccine to make a big dent in our unvaccinated population.
Does the COVID-19 vaccine alter your DNA?
Thank you. It's a natural question. Every time we mention genetics and ribonucleic acid, which is a genetic material, of course, either you are a physician or non-physician, or anybody, any reasonable person will ask, what is going to do to my genetic material? You are giving me something from outside. It's a very normal question to ask. So essentially with messenger RNA, first of all, what is messenger RNA? Our DNA, which is a genetic material, and it's a 2 strands of desoxyribonucleic acid, it stores all the information about the building blocks in our body and resources we need. And then the body, according to for that cookbook, body needs to build a lot of materials, mostly, for example, proteins that are essential for us functioning. Without our body producing proteins, which are essentially all enzymes in our body, we can literally drop dead instantly. So it is very important to have DNA working every day, producing the building blocks in our body. So what is the RNA then? RNA is a single-stranded molecule of ribonucleic acid. And messenger RNA, what it does, it takes that instruction from the from a cookbook, you have to give it to the chef. And the chef is the ribosome. These are tiny particles inside our cells that actually make the protein when they read the recipe. But from the storage place, it has to go to the chef in the kitchen. So the messenger RNA delivers this message. That's why it's called messenger RNA. Delivers message from the storage room to the chef in the cook that that's your recipe and that's how you make it. And messenger RNAs, very fragile, first of all. They get destroyed very quickly. And that's why all these pharmaceutical companies needed to jump through all these hoops, how to make it stable enough just to deliver inside the body without being destroyed. And after the vaccine induces immune response, that messenger outside material brought inside your body is destroyed and cleared completely. So, and the messenger RNA, by doing that, doesn't need to enter inside the nucleus of the cell. And the nucleus of the cell is where the DNA is. So it doesn't even enter the nucleus. So it cannot alter your DNA. First of all, because it's destroyed immediately. And the second, it doesn't even come close to where the DNA is.
Does the COVID-19 vaccine cause female sterilization?
Yeah, I'm aware of these rumors, and I think what happened is that the spike protein, as I mentioned, is a large protein molecule, and there is a tiny part in that S protein that has the similar sequence of amino acids that there is in a synthesin protein, which is in the placenta. And so that's why people made a conclusion, if you are making antibodies against that S protein, you will make the same antibodies against the placenta protein. But in order your immune system to do that, you have to be fairly similar. Those proteins have to be fairly similar. So let me ask you, you have brown eyes, I have brown eyes. Are we identical?
No.
I think we're quite different.
Yeah.
So the same thing here. It is a tiny, tiny part of this huge molecule that has the same brown eyes like the other one. It doesn't mean they're identical, and they cannot possibly induce the immune system to make antibodies about something that is so remotely, I can't even say a word similar. So that's a confusion. So identifying tiny, tiny part of something which is similar to something else, a much bigger part, it doesn't mean that the immune system will recognize it as something that it needs to act against. And the other proof of that the COVID vaccine is safe and it won't cause infertility is the experience with millions of people who already been infected with COVID, and there are no reports that anybody's pregnancy, somebody had a spontaneous abortion, or somebody couldn't get pregnant just because they experienced COVID infection. Because if that theory was true, then why so many millions of infected women and thousands of pregnant women did not have issue in that part? So this probably is not a realistic concern. That's something we have to worry about.
Will there be a chip or other type of tracking device in the vaccine?
This is something that also happened just from something that was misunderstood by unwillingly, or maybe someone did it on purpose. But there was information about the potential availability of vaccines which have like a tag on it. And this tag is attached to the container, not the vaccine. And what that tag, idea of that, it does not exist in reality. There's no vaccine is tagged right now. This is a proposal, theoretically possible. That tag is attached to vaccine container, not the vaccine. Nobody is injecting any tags inside the human body. And that idea was so that, for example, nurses injecting vaccine. So that tag is like a barcode. And it tells you that the vaccine is real, that it's not counterfeit vaccine, what the dose is, what the expiration dose is, and then it says where it was injected. There's no personal information on these tags. So this was actually, ironically, it was a safety precaution to make sure that you are getting the right stuff. So unfortunately, it got misunderstood that the vaccine itself is being tagged and it's being injected into human body to track us. So that's totally not true. As well, it's not true that Bill Gates is also inserting microchip in the vaccine. Bill Gates Foundation was involved in contributing to funding of the vaccine research, and specifically COVID vaccine research. But I don't think Bill Gates was nowhere close to any manufacturing or production, and he wasn't in the room where vaccines are being made. So I think it's another kind of a unreasonable rumor.
We've talked about all of this, and it's all really good information, but let's just kind of sum it up a little bit. So what would you tell someone who is hesitant about getting this vaccine?
We understand your hesitancy. This is a new vaccine. As I mentioned, this is a totally different vaccine that has no part of, any part of virus or whole part of it, whole virus or any part of it in the vaccine. So you cannot be infected with the vaccine. And by taking vaccine, you actually decreasing risk of getting severe illness or the complications of the illness. Even though younger and healthy people do much better than older and sick people, no one is free of risk. And even healthy and young can develop unexpectedly severe form of the infection. So you're protecting yourself. And as I mentioned before, by immunizing yourself, you are likely protecting your loved ones by having a much less chance of developing infection and then infecting others.
So thank you, Dr. T, for joining us today and answering these questions that I know lots of people have. And as always, you can visit mostopscovid.com for answers to these questions and many more.
Thank you, Megan.